Well, there are moments in the gospel when the story slows down, when the camera zooms in, when we're no longer simply observers, when we're participants. And this is one of those moments. John 19 is not abstract theology, it's not a metaphor. What it is raw, it is political, and it is violent. It is painfully human. And if we let it, it will expose us. Because this is not only about what happened to Jesus, it's about what happens when love confronts power, when truth confronts fear, when a kingdom built on self-giving love stands before a world built on domination, control, and accumulation. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. Just pause there for a moment. Flogged, whipped, torn flesh. Violence meant not only to punish, but to humiliate. The soldiers weave a crown of thorns and they press it into his scalp. And they drape him in purple, the color of empire. They mock him. Hail, King of the Jews! And they strike him and they laugh and they strike again. And it's cruel satire, a parody of kingship. And then Pilate brings him out before the crowd and says, "Here is the man. Look at him. This is what your king looks like. He's not armored. He's not enthroned. He's not insulated by wealth, not protected by status. He's bleeding. He's vulnerable. He's unarmed." And the crowd shouts, "Crucify him!" Before we rush to condemn the crowd, we need to be honest with ourselves. This crowd is not a mob of monsters. This crowd is a group of frightened people, anxious people, people afraid of losing control, people afraid their world is changing. People who told this man that he's a threat to their stability. The crowd is us. There are people today who say the Bible isn't political. Faith should stay out of politics, and I understand what they mean. The gospel does not belong to a political party. It doesn't wave a campaign banner. It's not red, it's not blue. It's not red, white, or blue. But John 19 makes something unavoidably clear. The crucifixion of Jesus was political. Not partisan, but political. Jesus wasn't executed for his private spirituality. He was executed because he proclaimed a kingdom. He announced a reign of God that didn't operate by domination, coercion, accumulation, or fear. He proclaimed good news to the poor. He challenged the systems that exploited the vulnerable. He exposed religious leaders who colluded with power. And the charge that sealed his fate was this: everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the Caesar. Rome didn't crucify people for being devout. Rome crucified people who threatened its order. Jesus threatened a system that was built on fear, wealth, extraction, and violent control. He threatened leaders who valued position more than justice. He threatened authorities willing to sacrifice integrity to maintain influence, and they killed him. Pilate says 3 times, "I find no case against him." 3 times. He knows this is wrong. He knows Jesus is innocent. But preserving his own power matters more. There's a contemporary story that helps me feel this text in my bones. Some of you may know the name Walter McMillan, a black man in Alabama who wrongly was accused of murder. There were witnesses who could place him somewhere else. There were holes in the case. But once fear, race, politics, and public pressure took over, truth mattered less than having someone to blame. And that is the haunting part. It was not just one cruel person. It was a whole system of people making calculations, protecting careers, protecting reputations, protecting a story they had decided to tell. And so an innocent man was sent to death row. Brian Stevenson tells that story so powerfully because underneath it is the aching truth. They knew something was wrong, and they still let it happen. That's what I hear in this gospel. Not because Jesus says much here. He barely speaks. But in his presence, in his silence, in the battered body standing there before Pilate, and Pilate saying, here is the man, look at him, look at the one everyone has decided must carry the fear of the moment. Look at the one the system is willing to crush so everybody else can feel secure. They knew something was wrong, and they still let it happen. That is why John 19 is so personal. See, Pilate is not just a Roman governor long ago. Pilate is every moment when conscience bows to convenience. The crowd is every moment when fear becomes cruelty. And Jesus is every innocent person the world decides is acceptable collateral damage. The cross shines light on every system where power protects itself at the expense of the vulnerable. Rome then, any empire now, wherever wealth is accumulated by crushing the poor, wherever leaders value standing over truth, wherever fear manipulates conscience, the cross stands as both judgment and invitation. And beneath all of it is a deeper sickness. Beneath the cruelty is a spiritual disease. Beneath the empire is an economy of greed that brings us to the theme of carnival, farewell to greed and materialism. Historically, carnival is a season of excess before Lent, a final indulgence. And then comes the fast, the letting go, the farewell. And maybe that's exactly what this text is asking us. A farewell, not to just sweets or luxuries, but to the deeper forces that distort the soul. Farewell to greed. Farewell to materialism. Farewell to the illusion that more will save us. Farewell to the lie that security comes from what we possess, protect, and accumulate. Because Pilate's problem is not only fear, it is greed. And not greed for money alone, but greed for control, greed for status, greed for security, greed for the preservation of his place in the system. Pilate, I don't think, woke up that morning saying, today I think I'm going to commit injustice. He simply loves his position more than he loves truth. And that is how injustice so often happens. Not usually through dramatic villainy, more often through small compromises, through self-protection, through silence, through the unwillingness to risk comfort, status, or advantage. Where do we do that? Where do we protect? Where do we protect comfort instead of protecting the vulnerable? Where do we stay quiet because courage might cost us? Where do we cling to what benefits us, even when it harms somebody else? Pilate isn't foreign to us. He lives in every heart that calculates before it loves. And then comes the line that echoes across history, we have no king but Caesar. This is the Passover time, the celebration of liberation from Pharaoh, the memory of God overthrowing empire. And yet here are religious leaders pledging allegiance to Caesar. Why? Because Jesus is threatening their control. He's destabilizing their hierarchy. He endangers the arrangement from which they benefit. And that too is greed. Greed is not only about wealth. It's about clinging to power, clinging to privilege, clinging to systems that work for us, even if they crush someone else. And materialism isn't only about buying too much stuff. Materialism is a spiritual imagination, a way of seeing the world where worth is measured by possession, success, image, and accumulation. It's what happens when our lives become organized around having instead of loving. When the market shapes us more than mercy, when consumerism drives us more effectively than Jesus. And the cross stands before all of that and says, no. No, your life does not consist in the abundance of your possessions. No, your security is not finally found in what you can keep. No, the soul is not healed by accumulation. Would we reduce faith to private spirituality so that it never confronts injustice? when we're more anxious about the market than mercy, when nationalism eclipses baptism, it's then we whisper, "We have no king but Caesar." That line should unsettle us. Pilate says, "Do you not know that I have the power to release you and power to crucify you?" And Jesus answers, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given from above." This isn't weakness. This is strength under control. And Jesus isn't trapped here. He is choosing. He could defend himself on the world's terms, but he doesn't. Because his kingdom is not built by domination. It is built by self-giving love. He surrenders retaliation. He surrenders the need to win. He surrenders the will to dominate. And in doing so, he unmasks the empire. He reveals what greed ultimately does. It crucifies love. Empire runs on acquisition, more land, more wealth, more influence, more control. And Jesus disrupts that order by announcing a kingdom where the poor are blessed, the last are first, the hungry are fed, the outcast is welcome, and the human person matters more than profit. And so greed eliminates Jesus. It appears for a moment that hate is more powerful than love, that violence is more powerful than compassion, that empire is more powerful than mercy. This is the story of Good Friday. But as the late Tony Campolo famously said, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming. And we remember love is more powerful than hate. Following Jesus means saying farewell to that whole system, farewell to greed, farewell to materialism, farewell to the restless ache for more, farewell to the illusion that hoarding will make us safe. Farewell, Jesus. Following Jesus means saying, my worth is not measured by what I own. My security is not guaranteed by what I accumulate. My future is not protected by how tightly I cling. We follow a king, stripped nearly naked, a king who dies owning nothing, a king who shows us that love, not leverage, is what lasts. That mercy, not money, is what saves. That generosity, not greed, is the shape of the kingdom of God. And saying farewell to materialism is not about guilt. It is about freedom. Freedom from needing more. Freedom from comparing. Freedom from clinging. Freedom from being owned by what we own. For this story to be more than ancient history, we must see ourselves in it today. We live in a world where truth is bent for advantage, where power protects itself, where fear is weaponized, and vulnerable people are treated as collateral damage. And if we're honest, in our own country, that has meant again and again, black and brown bodies, LGBTQ lives, immigrants, and people who do not worship like us or talk like us. It looks like neighborhoods once redlined where the consequences still ripple forward. Looks like unequal schools, unequal sentencing, unequal protection. It looks like immigrant families who harvest our food, build our homes, care for our children, and still live in fear of being torn apart. Looks like decisions made in boardrooms and courtrooms where the people most affected are rarely in the room. Now hear me carefully. This is not about shaming one political party or another. This is about recognizing patterns of power, and the cross will not let us look away. Because on the cross, it is Jesus that becomes the collateral damage. An innocent body sacrificed to preserve stability. A brown-skinned man executed by the empire to maintain order. And if we follow a crucified king, we cannot ignore where crucifixion still happens socially, economically, and culturally. Because courageous faith asks hard questions. Where have we benefited from systems that disadvantage others? Where has silence protected our comfort? Where has greed shaped our choices? Where has consumerism numbed our compassion? Where has fear kept us from listening? And where do we say we follow Jesus while living as though Caesar still sets the terms? That is different from partisan outrage. That is cross-shaped courage. And the question is not whether evil exists. The question is how we respond to it. Do we chant with the crowd because it feels safer? Do we wash our hands like Pilate because involvement feels costly? Do we tell ourselves, this isn't my problem? Or do we stand calmly, gracious, firmly for the truth? Standing for truth may look like refusing to repeat misinformation, even when it benefits our side. It may look like defending the dignity of someone being mocked. It may look like choosing generosity when accumulation feels smarter. It may look like speaking up for someone whose voice is ignored. It may look like buying less and sharing more. But we must be careful. Standing for the truth is not the same as standing above others. Jesus never looked down from the cross. He looked out. He absorbed. He forgave. He loved. Courageous faith is not loud arrogance. It is steady conviction. It is strength wrapped in humility. It is refusing to become that very thing that we oppose. Because if we're honest, there are moments when we have chosen comfort over courage. Moments when we've stayed silent. Moments when self-interest won. Moments when greed whispered more loudly than grace. And yet Christ did not abandon us. He stood before us, crowned with thorns, and said nothing condemning, only truth, only love, only the suffering presence of God, refusing to let go of the world. And the final crescendo in the story comes when Pilate says, "Here is your king." And they answer him, "Away with him." And now that sentence lands not only in history, but in us. Because every day we choose. When profit conflicts with principle. When comfort conflicts with compassion. When silence conflicts with justice. When fear conflicts with love. When greed conflicts with generosity. Here is your king. Will we choose the one crowned with thorns? The one who refused to retaliate? The one who stood for truth without arrogance? The one who surrendered power to reveal a deeper power? The one who showed us a life rooted not in having, but in loving? Because following him will require courage. It will require generosity. It will require us to say farewell. Farewell to greed. Farewell to materialism. Farewell to the anxious need to secure ourselves at the expense of others. Farewell to the empire's definition of success. But it will also free us. Free us from fear. Free us from contempt. Free us from needing to win. Free us from being owned by what we own. Free us to love boldly. Free us to stand for justice without losing grace. Free us to confront evil without becoming it. And so here is the man. Here is your king. May we not only admire him from afar, but may we resemble him. Amen.